This video is sponsored by my patrons on Patreon. If you enjoy this video and would like to contribute to seeing more like it, consider making a pledge yourself. The link is in the description below. YouTube is undoubtedly one of the weirdest websites that I've ever witnessed in totality. From its infancy all the way to the behemoth that it is now, I've had the wondrous, and sometimes not so wondrous, pleasure of watching the platform grow up completely. During this tumultuous roller coaster of growing pains and breakthroughs, I found myself involved in a bunch of vastly different corners that it had to offer. From battle rap to gaming to video essays to cooking to film reviews to skit comedy, I had a plethora of communities that I got to witness grow, stumble, and eventually flourish into what they are in the present day. Yet, when taking all those different venues into account, the one group that I will always find myself being the most invested in is the commentary genre. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm discussing, the commentary genre is, well, a lot of things, as we will be going over in this video, but to sum up the core idea, it's a type of video where someone gives an opinion or recap of something, generally a prominent happening on YouTube itself or the bigger sphere of social media. In fact, it falls surprisingly on par with the actual definition of commentary, which is an expression of opinions or offering of explanations about an event or situation. The thought process at this point generally becomes, well, that could actually come in any form. Come to think of it, what differentiates a commentary from a review of something or a video essay? How do you establish what is and isn't a commentary video in an ever-changing landscape? And who are some of the most standout creators in the genre now and in its history? Those aren't the questions that you had? Well, can you at least pretend that they were? Because that would really help out the video. You're in luck, because throughout the remainder of this video, I want to dissect the history of the genre and the surprisingly distinct stages that it went through leading up to 2022. It's finally time to put my 60 college credits towards becoming a history teacher to good use. This is the evolution of the commentary genre. Before we get into this video properly, I want to throw a quick disclaimer out there. During this video, I will be sticking to a narrative about progression, and through doing so, I will occasionally be giving my opinions on creators and their content. It's important to note that I have no bad blood towards any creators that I mention, barring that I outright insult them as people. Unless you're blatantly being derogatory or either committing or supporting heinous acts, I think there is a place and audience for every single person on this platform. And once again, even heinous acts are subjective based on my perspective, so just know that despite the formal presentation, this is essentially an opinion piece. Alright, enough blabbering, let's get into it, shall we? As you can tell from the title, this video is covering the evolution of commentary, and I think the best parallel to draw is to the evolution of the world itself. There are 5 historical time periods that are recognized as significant eras for the development of the world. The first is one that you are more than likely familiar with, which is the prehistoric era. The prehistoric era encompasses the interval of time that starts with the first traces of human beings existing and ends in 600 BCE, which is the phase of human history where there's evidence of life, but almost no actual written records of it. It's also often referred to as the foundational era, as many mainstays of human civilizations came to the forefront in that span. Within the prehistoric era, there are even more subsections, those being the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, all of which we will discuss later. Essentially, we're talking about the construction of the base level of human society, which can be directly compared to the early to mid 2010s of YouTube commentary. The first subsection, the Stone Age, takes up the majority of the prehistoric era, lasting from 2.5 million BCE to 3000 BCE. It can be best described as primitive, with the first humans showing up and stagnating for a long time while figuring out the basics, like using stones for tools, hence the name of the subsection, you get it. There were a bunch of sparse nomadic groups that were scattered all over the place, and not many specific details are known about the time period. The same can be said about commentary. There were channels all over the site that could have been considered commentary, but that's just because early YouTube was just a lot of people sitting in front of a camera and talking. One creator stood out from the rest to me though when attempting to pinpoint the exact place where commentary started, and that was Amazing Atheist. And I think he embodies the prehistoric vibe of commentary very well. He utilized only the bare minimum, that being a mediocre quality camera and minimal editing, and he would sit and stand in front of it and simply talk to the camera about something that he had either come across in his own personal life, or something prevalent in the media, or anything at all, really. He was very passionate about his opinions, and whether you agreed with the sentiment of his videos or not, he was a figure that could definitely command some attention. He started creating this type of content in 2007, and considering the fact that YouTube was created in 2005, I'd be hard-pressed to think that there would be many other creators before him to be making such content, let alone at the level that TJ is at right now. I'm sure there were commentators before him, but for the sake of this video, I think it's fair to use him as the anchor for the Stone Age of commentary. Next, we move ahead to the Bronze Age, which occurred between 3000 BCE and 1300 BCE. And this is where things start to get more centered in the world as well as in the commentary sphere. The world saw the first true civilization come into existence with Mesopotamia, which is probably one of the only terms that you remember from your middle school history classes. Other ancient civilizations followed suit, such as Egypt and the Indus Valley, and humans started becoming more goal-oriented and organized, with the best example of these traits being the pyramids of Egypt. Agriculture started to boom with the invention of the wheel, art and architecture were being advanced, and government and religion became big factors of these new civilizations. There were a lot of individual aspects of a community being developed, but they hadn't necessarily been put together to create one yet. Flash forward to 2015 on YouTube, and we start to see more commentators pop up and hear rumblings of a community forming. Specifically, a new format started to blossom known as reaction commentary, where the commentator would watch a video and intersperse their opinions on it in a generally immature fashion. 3 bigger channels were spearheading this movement, those being H3H3 Productions, Pyrocynical, and the infamous Leafy is Here. Not only were they making the same content, but one could even argue that they were friends. No, but seriously, they were aware of each other and interacted with each other on other social media sites like Twitter. They'd even occasionally overlap content and make videos about the same subjects, including my favorite weed smoker and head driller Stomedy, in a way that didn't actually seem like stealing. The content also had made gigantic leaps since the Stone Age, as the editing had gotten significantly better, with Pyrocynical coming from an MLG background and the other two having basic ideas about Sony Vegas and how it worked. The quality of the footage being used had made a jump as well, considering the latter two used gameplay, and H3 always had a pretty solid looking camera interlaced with footage of the video they were reacting to. They were starting to gain cult followings that were rising exponentially, so much so that everyone's favorite gnome, Keemstar, invited both Leafy and Pyro onto Drama Alert for a playground insults match, citing them as rising stars, which they definitely were. Things started becoming more organized and advancements of quality were undoubtedly being made, which is what the entire point of the Bronze Age of human history was. As we know now, this was the early stage of what would later become known as the mid-2010s commentary community, which came to fruition during the next period, which is known as the Iron Age, which lasted from 1300 BCE to 600 BCE. Not to speak hyperbolically, but this is when humans finally started to put everything together. Of course, the advancement from stone to iron tools is what marked the switch between eras, but the key facet of the Iron Era that I would like to focus on is that this is the era where people started making planned cities. More advanced architecture started appearing, with four-room houses being organized together and connected by streets and more progressive water systems. This also marked the very early days of writing itself, with alphabets and documentation of landmark events bringing in a completely new era. Humans finally seemed to be participating in and adapting to something that was genuinely structured, and they were absolutely reaping the benefits of doing so. Once again, if you somehow haven't caught the pattern of the video yet, this aligns with the way in which the commentary genre started thriving in the year of 2016. Out of the woodworks, a plethora of commentary channels started materializing out of thin air, and the head honchos that I mentioned in the Bronze Age started becoming some of the most prevalent and most exciting creators on the entire platform, with Leafy often pulling in 1 million views on a video within 24 hours. There was a direct hierarchy of channels that everyone respected, and an abundance of opportunity to grow, with commentary literally becoming one of the most popular and saturated genres on the internet within a year. Every creator was interlinked in one way or another, and they were all collaborating in a space that would help see a bunch of these newborn creators see an unprecedented amount of success. You could even say that it started to look like a society. It was the big boom that gave us content creators that are super relevant to this day, such as Elvis the Alien, Nafuckers, Quackity, Bionic Pig, and I'm Alex. Hey, remember that disclaimer I put at the beginning of the video? Keep that in mind while I go off on this brief tangent, because I don't know if I'll have another chance to do so. Alex, with every fiber in my being, I want to tell you to go f*** yourself. As someone who has been following your path on this website since you were an actual child, I need you to know that you are either one of the scummiest creators that I have ever seen or one of the most immature creators that I have ever seen, and by God, I hope it's the latter. You have proven time and time again, friendship after friendship, that you have absolutely no idea what you're doing in serious situations, and your need to insert yourself into everything leads me to believe that you have some type of complex. You need therapy, Alex Emil, and you need it at this very instant. You have ruined so many careers and friendships with people who care about you for absolutely no reason whatsoever, that you need to look inside of yourself and get down to the bottom of it. Because at the rate you're going, one of these days, there will be actual, tangible repercussions for your actions, and you will have nobody to blame but yourself. Everyone involved in that sector of commentary, or the offsprings of people from that time period, often refer to 2016 as the greatest time to be a commentator, due to the bountiful amount of kinetic energy and the lack of censorship that has hit the website ever since. And I can really appreciate the genre as it was in 2016, as well as the creators still keeping the aura of that time around on the site. I was actually an active participant in it, as there is a video out there on the internet where I talk about the whole self-deprecating fad that was going on. But once again, another story for another time. That being said, to me, the wave that brought commentary to the mainstream from 2015 to 2016 was something that created the perfect setup for what was to come. And we didn't have to wait long to see what it was. The next era of human history, which is my personal favorite to analyze, is the Classical Era, also known as Classical Antiquity. It lasted from 600 BCE to 476 CE, and the main focus in regards to development were two of the most well-known empires of all time, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Rome was one of the biggest political powers to ever grace the planet and gave to the world a more functional and proper legal system, absolutely stunning architecture, and Christianity. On the other side of the coin, Greece was one of the biggest information hubs ever, as the ideas burgeoning there have influenced Western culture to this very day. Art, science, and the most notable thing for this section, philosophy, had arrived and made themselves known in a big way. Plus, they gave us Alexander the Great, who was one of our first ever bi-kings. Back to philosophy, the big three names of the era, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, started really delving into subjects in a more equivocal way. Instead of merely lecturing his students on what they were to be learning, Socrates asked them ambiguous questions that required deeper thinking as opposed to a cut-and-dry response. Plato, who was a student of Socrates, focused on ethics and became a teacher of the final member of the three, Aristotle, who developed the study of logic. Trust me, it's a real thing. I took a whole class for it, and you don't want me to go through the specifics of if-then equations. These three are the foundation of how philosophy is discussed in the modern age, and I bet you can guess where this is going, can't you? Flashing back forward to 2016, I want to look at a very specific beef to start this off, and that would be the H3 versus Leafy debacle. Although commentary YouTubers were becoming the next big thing, there was a shared sentiment amongst a decent amount of YouTube that H3 voices in this clip that I'm going to play right now.
It's stupid, honestly, that we've all gone this long giving these channels a pass, who are cancerous. I'm serious. I understand the situation they're in because they make videos every day. And it's really hard to find something to talk about every day. But you gotta, draw the line somewhere. At this point, it's literally just bowling. I mean, we used to make fun of SoFlo and all these prank channels for like making YouTube a worse place. But right now, these commentary channels are kind of the worst thing that's happened to YouTube. And for some reason, everybody's giving them a pass. And I mean, their content's okay, that critical view, that reaction is fun, it's interesting, it's engaging to watch. It's what we do on H3H3. But the whole bullying thing, it's like they seem to have focused in specifically on kids and vulnerable people. It's almost like a community made just for bowling.
What the commentary community seemed to lack was a level of nuance. Sure, I enjoy laughing at a rich guy being dumb, or I play Pokemon Go every day as much as the next cynical person, but there wasn't really a level of intellect there. It was mostly stating obvious jokes and giving surface level takes on situations. And while that is a completely viable form of content, it does beg the question, is there any way that this art form can be advanced? Is there potential for this genre to progress past an endless onslaught of repetitive, edgy humor, or was it destined to stay in the same vicious and droning cycle for all of eternity? This is where, as pretentious as this is going to sound, the big three of the commentary community come into play. The first creator that I want to talk about and also compare to Socrates is Colossal is Crazy. When people bring up the term critical commentary, the story always comes back to one singular root, and that is Colossal. I want to preface this statement by saying that this is not hyperbole. If Colossal is Crazy never published the minuscule total of 7 videos on his channel, the commentary community would look completely different in modern times, or it may have vanished off the platform altogether. One could even argue that if he continued uploading past 2018, he would be at the head of the commentary wave at this very moment. This can be proven by the massive hype that was built up around his reported and advertised return collaboration with another creator who is a part of the critical OGs, Nerd City, on the Living Meme J Station. So, what discerns Colossal from the masses and makes me throw these heaps of compliments on him? He was the first person, from what I had observed, to start asking questions. Instead of blatantly throwing a slab of meat out to a rabid pack of wolves with little to no care for the quality of the meat and the way the wolves ate it, he took his time to cook up the perfect Wagyu steak, directly portion it out to the wolves, and domesticate them with it. It's widely acknowledged that his first FouseyTube video, titled An Alternate Reality, is the blueprint that modern critical commentary channels model their content after. From the very advanced editing, which was totally out of place in a barren badland of CSGO gameplay and 480p face cams, to the incredible logical breakdowns on his video subjects, that video, that is from 5 years ago, would be considered top tier in 2022. That has to say something. It still has that classic edginess to it, but it's able to counter that with compelling points and a structured argument. If a Leafy is Here video was an intro to writing essay, a Colossal is Crazy video was a full-blown dissertation. Plus, it definitely helped that he had one of the most commanding and instantaneously intriguing voices that YouTube has ever seen. And no, it's not just because he's British, although that does help. As Socrates acted as the father of philosophy, if you were around for commentary in 2016, you would know that there was no figurehead that had more respect than Colossal. He had connections to nearly everyone who was anyone, and he was the moral compass that everyone looked to whenever something went awry inside the bubble, because he was the main person who was making commentary that had a real level of worth. There are hundreds of creators in the genre that have cited Colossal as a major inspiration, and just like Socrates, one of those creators who learned from him almost as a student would and even got a shout out from him just so happens to be my Plato comparison. Who is that? Well, his name almost carries a legendary status around whenever it gets brought up in conversation, for better or worse. The person that I'm talking about, of course, is someone that went by the name of Zaptai. Another quick disclaimer. The things that Ed did were very not great, and although his cancellation is an up-in-the-air subject based on some new information that has been discovered in the past couple of years through a couple of Nicholas Diorio videos, this is solely about the impact that his content had on the genre, not the person he was. Okay, so Zaptai was a part of the wave of creators like Elvis, Pig, and Alex that I previously mentioned. He was a rising creator who was taking off dramatically before he was canceled off the internet by the three names I just said, which I genuinely did unintentionally. So, what made Zaptai such an important creator that I would compare him to the likes of Plato? Well, I'm going to play you a clip from a Pyrocynical video made in late 2016 and a Zaptai video made in late 2016, and I think that should do some of the talking for me.
Now, I should say that she kills all the children, but that was kind of expected, and plus the joke is in very poor taste. So instead I'm gonna say she retreats from society, hides in her bedroom, makes a Minecraft account, records a bunch of Let's Plays over 1,000 episodes long, and then disappears into the nether to be never seen ever again. So technically, Matty B has indirectly taken the life of someone, so this kid is definitely looking at a manslaughter charge.
But in many cases, a face reveal is just seen as this massive deal. Like, this is an event. The fact that someone is showing their face publicly for the first time is fucking crazy to people. And in some cases, I can get that. People like Bad Lip Reading and How To Basic have gone years without anyone figuring out who they are somehow, and that honestly still continues to blow my mind. So when they face reveal, yeah, that's probably gonna be a fairly big deal. But when someone like me does it, who gives a shit?
In a landscape where all of his peers, except for one, which we will get to soon, don't worry, I didn't forget about him, were making the same monotonous content and dunking on the same exact people and subjects in the least effort exerting manner possible, Zaptai managed to be the antithesis of that. He made digestible videos that were very similar lengths to those of his contemporaries, but instead of talking about things like Joey Salads and Zoe Burger, he was discussing religion and the idea of leeching. They were commentary videos through and through, but instead of just stating the obvious, his commentary provoked questions and more consideration from the viewer than the common hee hee, Joey's world tour's so fat, hee hee video would. There was genuine merit to considering those videos art, and his ability to discuss more intricate and serious topics in a way that could get through to the average viewer was nothing less than remarkable. Zaptai also managed to continue developing the Colossal formula by going even further into ambiguity. Especially in the earlier days, Colossal tended to lean more on the jokey side of things and definitely took stances on the situations that he was discussing. In contrast, there were videos from Zaptai, specifically his series Taboo Topics, where ethics and the dichotomy of human behavior were at the forefront. In said videos, instead of pointing a certain way with a subjective overtone, he presented a bunch of facts covering all sides of the spectrum, made sure to carefully and thoroughly craft his argument, and then gave his takes on the situation. Even with his more YouTube drama-centered videos, he managed to incorporate a bigger idea that would put it into a different perspective than a normal commentary video would do. It was such a far cry from what people in his circle were making that it was impossible for him to not stand out and receive immense recognition for his unique presence. As I said, he was cancelled off the internet as soon as his engine really started revving, so his sample size is also relatively small. But if you want any idea of the content he would be making in the modern day, he has a channel called Bigby that is, and I'm saying this objectively, putting out really good content. So we finally get to Aristotle, who was the most art-focused of the three and specialized in logic and sciences. He was also a student of Plato, and while his comparison wasn't inspired by Zaptai, he did take inspiration from Colossal. Listen, the metaphor can't be perfect, alright? Let me breathe. And I bet you when I say that the Aristotle of the commentary community is none other than Bobby Burns, that you weren't expecting that whatsoever. In fact, during the time when he was making commentary content, I had to argue with people that it was indeed commentary. Although Bobby is now currently in a constant state of double-cheeked up on a Sunday afternoon, back in 2016 and 2017, he was making commentary bangers that added yet another unique element into the mix, and that was a heavy increase in creativity and production value. With Colossal and Zaptai, they had really shown progress in the genre through their editing to make their final products look more crisp and clean. But let's be honest here, there's only so much that you can do through editing itself. There's a ceiling there. Enter Bobby, who before he came into the commentary sphere was a movie reviewer who had worked on multiple films himself, even winning awards for some of them. With this background in filmmaking, the cinematic quality of his videos were on another level than anyone else at the time, excluding Nerd City, who, as I said previously, definitely deserves a shout out here. Here's a clip from an intro to one of his videos. Bobby Burns' commentary video was more of an experience than his predecessors, as you had absolutely no idea what you were going to get. There was always a level of theatrics and brilliant comedic skits that were attached to his stuff, whether it be traveling through the Speed Force to visit a future version of himself where he's the report of the week, or an entire video about the beauty of niche content in the form of a Blade Runner 2049 parody that involves the interconnecting lore that the channel had built up. For the record, it's called Explaining the Internet, an audience for anything, and it is one of the best YouTube videos ever. So you should definitely watch it if you haven't already. Not only did his topics hold more weight than Fuzi Too Bad or Tana Mojo Bad, but his videos were leagues above everybody, both in the way he pinpointed the pulse of the community and dissected it with ease, and in the copious amounts of creativity he was able to put on display while doing so. If I were to say what type of content would be peak commentary in the year 2022 and moving forward, I would absolutely say Bobby's output from his 2017 catalog, but factoring in the increased length that the current algorithm favors. Could you imagine an hour-long video of the quality that you've been seeing on the screen in front of you? It would be absolutely insane. And perhaps we could have gotten that if Bobby had continued down the path that had been set for him, but everyone's favorite anime antagonist Shane Dawson had to go and mess that up completely. That brings up another interesting point though, and that is this. These three creators had such distinct and interesting presences on the genre, yet in one way or another, they all stopped making the content they were making. So where does commentary manage to go from here? You caught me. I can't go past the classical era of commentary without mentioning the name that everyone usually gravitates towards when reminiscing about it. iDubbbz. You may be asking why I didn't include him as one of the big three, given that his videos had such a significant impact and the Content Cop series is the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to the Commentary Hall of Fame, if you will. While denying Ian's impact on the community is laughable, there is actually a simple reason for me doing such. I think that the three people that I chose all do an aspect of Ian's content better than him, thus rendering him less important. Colossal's humor was more pointed and witty, Zaptai's research and structure was more potent and meaningful, and Bobby's creativity is on another playing field entirely. So although iDubbbz had what is definitely the most popular and immediately influential series at the time, I think that the reverberations from the other three's content echoed farther into the future and directly impacted the type of commentary that we see to this very day. Anyways, as I was saying, towards the end of 2017 and the first half of 2018, we started to see what I can best describe as a very unstable transitional period. Sort of how the next era of human history was described. From 476 to 1450, the world entered the Middle Ages, or the medieval era, if you take up a discussion with a scholar. Luckily, I'm not a scholar, and the former title fits in much better with the idea of the video, so I will be taking that creative liberty, if you don't mind. Those scholars were right about one thing, though. Contrary to the name of the Middle Ages, which may imply a lack of meaningful events, especially considering that it's stuck between such a great intellectual era as classical antiquity and another equally groundbreaking period that we will talk about soon, there was a lot going on. In fact, a couple of main points stand out. The first detail that has to be touched on is the insane rise to power of the Catholic Church. After the fall of Rome, which had happened in the very late stages of the classical era, the slot for the biggest power in Europe was left open and promptly taken up by the Catholic Church. You know that whole church and state separation thing? That was because of those guys. They also decided to take on the Crusades, intended on removing Muslims from their holy land of Jerusalem, but in all reality, it just got a bunch of people yoinked. The other big event that needs to be mentioned is the bubonic plague, which killed off 20 million people in Europe, which was 30% of its population, between 1347 and 1350. It's the second deadliest panorama. See? Haha! I said a word that's not the actual word, but sounds like it, and that's a good joke, right? Of all time, only being surpassed by smallpox about 500 years later. So, given those two very noteworthy events, it's very interesting to see them translate over to commentary YouTube, as I said, towards the end of 2017 and the first half of 2018. There were a lot of things going on with YouTube as a site in general, but maybe the biggest thing that pertains to our specific timeline is the adpocalypse that happened a little earlier on in 2017. If you don't know what Adpocalypse 2017 was, here's a very quick summation. The head honcho of the site at the time, PewDiePie, did some things that were very inconsiderate and insensitive. I know, surprise, surprise. And the mainstream media ran with a narrative about him being a really bad guy. This brought attention to what type of content YouTube was supporting, and after brands did some investigating, they realized that their advertisements were being placed on some very not great videos. So a lot of them just started pulling their ads off the site completely. This led to YouTube cracking even more down on the content they would allow to be monetized. The people who were affected by this, as they were the community that leaned into edginess more than any other, were commentary channels. And let's be honest with each other here. Full-time YouTubers are inherently motivated by money, as, aside from some very rare circumstances, it's the main reason they're making videos. Thus, when their revenue stream is cut off, there are two avenues that they can choose to take. In that transitional period of 2017 to 2018, we started to see a lot of channels from the 2016 community that was thriving in both the prehistoric and classical eras either vanish off of the site or change their trajectory of their content towards something more acceptable, whether that be less intense commentary, the godforsaken Reddit videos, or even film reviews. Let's take a look at the three titans that I discussed previously, Leafy, H3, and Pyro. Leafy stopped making videos and took an extended leave of absence from the internet, as, being the edgiest of the three, there was no shot that he would last much longer in the space that Overlord Witchiki was attempting to create. H3 still made videos on their main channel for a bit, but shifted their focus over to a side project called the H3 Podcast, which is now one of the bigger podcasts on the site, because everyone knows that podcasts are easy content and incredibly profitable. And Pyro definitely toned down his content and started focusing on producing better and more relaxed content, which was the first step of him actually progressing on to making good content. Hey Pyro, remember when you called a black man a Malteser on multiple occasions? Yeah, you still have to answer for that one, my guy. So, considering the 2016 squad had essentially disbanded and some of the Titans were nowhere to be found, the spot at the top of the hierarchy was open for the taking, and there was a group of people who were ready to pounce. One of the other giant stories coming into the Middle Ages were the creators who made content on the app Vine, which had shut down, making the migration to YouTube. At the head of the push, we saw creators like Logan Paul, Lele Pons, and David Dobrik come over and almost immediately take over their respective spaces. But hidden amongst the masses of vloggers and skit comedians, there were some people who would take over the commentary genre in the coming years. The creator that I think perfectly represents this unstable period of transition is everyone's favorite 30-something who still acts like he's 22, Cody Ko. Known for being one of the most popular alternative creators on Vine, Cody originally came to his YouTube with skit comedy and vlogs, but he eventually waded into the commentary genre with one of the OG Instagram comedy videos, and really found a success take off when he decided to make a video on and parodying the punch bag of the world at the time, Jake Paul. Then, he unknowingly created the blueprint for modern-day reaction commentary with his That's Cringe series, where he would watch a wince-worthy video with his partner in crime, Noel Miller, and absolutely roast the heck out of it. I like to think that there is a bridge between 2016 commentary and the type of commentary that we're seeing now. And that bridge, in its entirety, is 100% Cody. He still carried the ruthless presence and humor of a 2016 creator, but because he came from a background where he was being comedic, he actually knew how to create and deliver punchlines well and make deeper cuts that didn't just focus on the low-hanging fruit. He also didn't, for the most part, punch down on people that everyone was dunking on at the time. There was a method to his selection process as opposed to opening up Twitter, looking on the front page and goofing on an e-celebrity for doing something super dumb. Again, he also made it very clear that the jabs and the sparring were in jest and had a kind-hearted nature to them as opposed to his predecessors who just did not do that. His videos were the perfect balance between the past and future of commentary at the time, and in a way, they symbolized a metaphorical passing of the baton from one generation to the next. He took the formula and molded it to a more rational audience. He started the transition from the average commentary viewer being a teenage boy who was a Discord mod to a teenage girl who thirsted over average-looking white men who look much younger than they actually are. But I digress. Cody genuinely ushered in the new wave of commentary, which I will be getting to. First, however, I would like to touch on one more creator who I think also symbolizes the Middle Ages very well, and that's one of my favorite people to ever grace the genre, Eddie Burback. While Cody seemed to take more inspiration from the prehistoric era, Eddie seemed to be an offspring of the classical era. Although he talked about topics that were more trendy to discuss, like the Paul brothers and Instagram comedy, what made him a standout creator is that he took completely different stances on said subjects and attacked them from more nuanced angles. He repeatedly said in his videos at the time that he doesn't like making videos about content if the only crime that it's committing is being subpar. Instead, he honed his sights on content that was detrimental to the platform itself, analyzed why it was so toxic, and proposed a solution as to how it could be fixed. While Cody birthed the modern landscape for reaction commentary, and gets 100% credit for doing so, I think that Eddie is an equally important contributor to the modern landscape of critical commentary. While previously critical commentary had kind of been sectioned off into this more intellectual mindset that involved heavy research and tons of effort, Eddie proved that it didn't have to be, and you could be more personal with your critique in a way where it almost comes off as a reaction commentary. That's not saying that Eddie's content wasn't smart, but it was way more palatable to the common YouTube viewer than an in-depth analysis on the inner workings of politics. He saw something that was happening on the platform that needed to be called out, and did so, while saying the things that everyone else was thinking, but perhaps weren't able to voice for one reason or another. Although he's now grouped in with, spoilers, the next group of people that I'm going to be talking about, I felt the need to group Eddie here, because I think he, like Cody, set a precedent for the subgenre of content that they belong to that was followed by many creators to this very day. He also managed to exhibit a more tactful approach by, for all intents and purposes, being the first commentary creator that I had ever seen that didn't really attack the people he was discussing. As opposed to holding this sort of superiority complex above his subject while dissecting them to death, which everyone previous to him tended to do, Eddie took on the role of the standard viewer. He didn't pretend to know everything about a subject that he didn't, or carry this level of arrogance about him. In fact, his main emotion in his earlier videos, and his videos till this day, is just complete and utter bewilderment at the ridiculous things he was looking into. He was able to shift the tone of his videos whenever he encountered a more serious topic, while still maintaining an atmosphere that didn't come off as ultra depressing. That is a skill that 95% of YouTubers nowadays can't even do. I mean, there's a reason that one of his first pieces of merchandise was a shirt with the word "Yikes" on it. That's the exact feeling you would get when you were watching a lot of his stuff. Through the pure aesthetics of his filming setup, with the 2 random movie posters in the background, or the Blue Yeti mic just sitting in the middle of the frame, he was able to portray a certain level of relatability, almost mimicking a conversation with a friend while you're having lunch across the table from them. Commentary doesn't need to be the most serious thing in the world, but it also needs to be treated with a level of care and respect. And Eddie was able to properly comprehend both ideas equally and implement them into some of the best and most unique commentary content that the platform has seen. Quick aside, if there is any person out of this group to follow after this video, and there's a lot of them, and I'll go over them at the end of this video, but Eddie is definitely one of the highest on my suggestion list, especially considering the whole Gus situation. Great content creator, even greater guy. Alright, push all that sappy stuff out of the way and let's move on to our next time period, shall we? So now we happen upon the early modern era, which takes up a pretty good chunk of time, from 1450 to 1750. Considering that this is such an expansive chapter of human history, there are an abundance of events that could be covered, but there are a couple specific happenings that have to do with, you guessed it, ideas that we will be turning our attention towards. Firstly, the world saw one of the biggest upheavals of all time with something known as the Reformation, or the Protestant Reformation to be exact. Remember the whole Catholic Church thing that I brought up during the Middle Ages? Well, it seemed like the world had had enough of them, and through the help of such important reformers as Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Henry VIII, the proverbial dictatorship of the Catholic Church was overthrown and made way for more broad discussion and practicing of Christianity. This wasn't just a religious revolution either, as it had a widespread impact on the way that civil rights, capitalism, and democracy are looked at today. The key thing to take away here, though, is that the Protestant Reformation literally redefined how everyone looked at Christianity, and to an extent, the practicing of religion itself. We'll get to the other developments soon enough, but let's jump forward to 2018 to 2019 to make our comparison. It's time to revisit the Viner invasion, as although it started in the commentary community in 2017, it wouldn't really start to be as apparent until the latter half of 2018 or so. There were Viners turned commentators coming out the wazoo. Is that an expression that people will know, because it could sound really weird if they didn't? With the 3 at the helm of the movement being arguably the 3 most popular at the moment: Danny Gonzalez, Drew Gooden, and Curtis Connor. They had all been incredibly popular on Vine, with the first 2 even being in Vine's first long-ish form series, Camp Unplug. And Drew even has one of the most quotable Vines of all time, with "Road work ahead, I sure hope this stops being a thing anytime soon." Alas, when they first came onto the platform, it took them a while to gain a really solid fan base, since there was actually a stigma against creators transferring over to YouTube from Vine. In 2018, they finally started to find their footing by doing something that 100% changed the commentary game forever. As the Protestant Reformation was about redefining Christianity and the way that it was viewed and approached, these three, at least as the mainstream is concerned, changed the way that commentary was viewed and approached. Up until the early modern era, commentary was kind of boxed into a corner in regards to content. Apart from Zaptai, creators who were considered to be part of the commentary community seemed to solely focus their commentary on YouTubers and YouTube goings-ons. And it made sense, considering that those were the topics that would pull in significant views, and it seemed like from the prehistoric to the classical era, someone was making a slip up every other minute for the mob to pounce on. So although everyone made the same content on the same stuff, the well of material never ran dry. And while both Drew and Danny started off by making content on those types of subjects in order to get that initial push from the algorithm, Curtis isn't included here because he started a little bit later than the other two. They did something that is key to the success of any YouTuber, which is expanding. They secured their core fan base, and once they didn't have to make that type of algorithm-pleasing content to be successful, they generally didn't. Instead, they branched off over to topics like different social media platforms, with TikTok being thrown into the mix as a main target, other forms of media such as horrible knockoff movies or television commercials, and even things that were completely unrelated to the internet, like Vin Diesel, or Mason Ramsey, or One Direction fanfictions. I know this sounds extreme, but this trio really helped open the floodgates of other topics that could be discussed and helped commentary be removed from this blanket term that its own community members had unintentionally thrust it into. They also found a way to approach their subjects differently. While Cody was the first step of evolution in de-edgifying commentary, he still had a sense of clowning that was pretty harsh. If Cody's comedy is like the film Airplane, biting, satiric, and over-the-top full of shenanigans, then the trio of Danny, Drew, and Curtis's comedy were Groundhog Day, more laid-back, absurdist, and goofy. They managed to make commentary something that could be marketable to more than just one sector of YouTube's audience, while simultaneously sliding into the more ad and brand-friendly terrain that Wojcicki and her crew were attempting to cultivate. It really paid off because, for better or worse, the three of them are now the faces of the commentary genre. Now, don't get me wrong, although I am grouping these three together, they do have their own defining factors that make them stand out from each other. Drew's humor is incredibly dry. Danny's humor is more theatrical, which makes sense considering he was a theater kid, and Curtis is just a wholesome boy. But because of their history, considering that they have filmed many different collaborations together, and even went on tour as a group, I think that it is an okay thing to do. Without the three of them, it's very likely that the sit-down, face-to-face, laid-back but informative commentary style that we see as the prevalent medium in 2022 would not have taken off in the way that it did. I would also like to give a big shout out to Jarvis Johnson and Scott Kramer, who came in a little farther behind the other three, but managed to create even more of a field of choice for commentary. Frankly, I don't know how we get to the next generation without everyone I mentioned here, so shout out to them. That's not all we have to discuss for the early modern era though. As I said, there were a couple of happenings for us to cover. The other happening is one of the most romanticized time periods of all time, the Renaissance. Why do you think they have fairs about it all the time all over the place? Actually, that's a different Renaissance than the one we're talking about, but it's technically not, as every country in Europe had their own version of the Renaissance, but there were countries that were more prominent than others. History is weird. The Renaissance, more than any other period in time from my viewpoint, was the time of minds. After the Middle Ages, which didn't place a lot of focus on the arts or philosophy, they were really brought to the spotlight once again. The amount of geniuses and people who changed their art form were insane. Da Vinci, Chaucer, Descartes, Copernicus, Dante, Shakespeare, and Hobbes were all minds that were breaking new ground at the time. We are also going to look at a subsection of the Renaissance movement called Renaissance humanism. This was a revival of classical antiquity philosophy thinking that originated in Italy, which is arguably the biggest player in this whole Renaissance thing, but eventually spread all over Western Europe. So the early modern era was simultaneously seeing the ideas of the classical era come back, while art was making more traction than it had in a very long time. Noted? Good. Moving back over to the commentary timeline, around the same space of time that the Danny, Drew, and Curtis trio was shooting up the ranks, there was a different movement going on in the sphere that was centered around two boys who go by the names of The Right Opinion and Jay Aubrey. We're going to be focusing the narrative around Tro, considering that Jay Aubrey was a bit later to the party, and almost everything you can say about one applies to the other when it comes to content, but just know that both of them are here on this list. Early on in his career, The Right Opinion often got compared to Colossal as crazy, and people often insinuated that it was because they both had luscious British voices. I'm here to say that I think there's a bit more to it than that. As I mentioned, the early modern era had a revival of classical antiquity in regards to thinking and approach to difficult matters. If you remember correctly, Colossal is the person I cited as really kicking off the classical era, and I think it would be impossible to say that there wasn't any inspiration in Tro's content from the clown. He dedicated his videos to doing deep dives on YouTubers, going through the entire timeline of events that happened with said YouTuber and critically picking apart the situation in a very statistical and logical manner. The other thing I mentioned previously, however, is that there was also a great advancement in the arts from the Renaissance, in the same time span that overlaps with classical antiquity revival. And considering that the bulk of Colossal's content was created in a completely different time where more things were acceptable and the genre was less saturated, if you can believe that, it would be impossible to just copy his approach and leave it at that. Tro took the critical revolution of 2016 to 2017 and plunged even further into uncharted waters. The first very evident improvement is the editing. In contrast to the wave of 2016 commentary, who tended to take on the editing of their projects themselves, Tro compiled a literal army of editors dedicated to doing exactly that, one for each different section of the video. In doing this, inherently, the workload isn't too intense for every person, and the quality of the editing is top-notch and, at this point in 2019, better than most channels similar in size and recognition in the community. Sure, having an editor wasn't a new idea at this point, but having a team of editors working on videos so they could be longer and be pushed out at a more consistent pace was definitely a game changer. Another thing to take into account were the videos themselves. Up until this point, nobody had cut as deep and been as thorough and straight up surgical with their autopsy of YouTubers than Tro was. Even with a lot of content from the classical era, there was more of an amateur style to it. There were jokes often thrown in the videos and little quips or tangents towards relevant issues included that would go on just a hair too long. Tro did not do that. Instead, he made sure that every second of his video counted towards the point he was trying to make, and he was able to use phenomenal syntax to do so. He didn't jam-pack the video full of information to the point that it was impossible to retain any of the things that he had said. His pacing on his speech was polished, the amount of time that he spent on each subsection was timed very well, and the videos almost came off as bigger productions than they actually were. I am aware that this section specifically sounds like I'm brown-nosing, but for better or worse, I've been saying that a lot in this video. Commentary would not be where it is right now if it wasn't for Tro and Jay Aubrey. They took the critical formula that had been pushed into the background, touched it up significantly with the advancements made in the art form, and helped reintegrate it back into the foreground of YouTube. If that's not something that should be commended, then I do not know what it is. So we are now emerging from an era that saw a completely new class of creators become the cream of the crop, and we are only left with one era to cover. From 1750 to the present day, the world has been experiencing the modern era. Hey, historians, could you have tried any harder than just dropping a word to name your time periods? Oh, actually, just coming in, apparently it can also be referred to as the late modern era. Because that's so much better. Dumb names aside, this is a tricky one to really sink our teeth into. Because so much happened and because everything is on record, we have a comprehensive understanding of the things that happened. So I'm going to focus this section around three words: expansion, of knowledge. In this space and time, the world has seen two separate industrial revolutions that brought around such inventions like the light bulb, the cotton gin, and the airplane. We're skipping right over the Great Depression, which is akin to roughly March to May of 2020, where the world was falling apart and YouTubers were unmotivated to make anything, for some reason that I can't mention without being demonetized. As I was saying, skipping past that, the other subsection that should be mentioned when talking about expanding knowledge is the contemporary period, which started in 1945 and hasn't ended because it's still happening. This is often referred to as the age of information, where advancements in technology have defined almost everything around us. And looking at where we were in 1945 and looking at where we are now, that would make a lot of sense. Drawing an analogy to this period was tricky at first, until all of a sudden, it wasn't. From the end of the early modern era, which I would consider being around midway through 2019 or so, to now, commentary has undergone a huge expansion. As someone who has been around since the beginning of commentary, I'm just gonna let my bias come out here, considering we are in the proverbial final act. This is 100% my favorite era of commentary. Listen, I loved all of the aforementioned eras and their very specific zeitgeists too, as I wouldn't have made an entire commentary video about them all if I didn't. But this one is the most special, and the reason is simple. Commentary is now universal. As much as OGs would like to think that commentary was a widespread phenomenon in 2016 that the whole site was paying attention to, the blunt truth is that it was still a very niche genre that only a certain populated group of people tuned into. Nowadays, however, I can go from a deep informational dive from Gokanaru about H3H3 being an absolute weirdo to a well thought out opinion piece from Smoky Glow talking about the ethical implication and repercussions of mommy vloggers. There is a commentary audience for anything, and I think that's one of the most awesome things that has happened to the site ever. I think it's so cool seeing other sides of the platform that I'm passionate about get commentary videos made on them. This also involved more diversity coming into the community, with women and people of different backgrounds and races and sexualities getting the push from YouTube. And if you think it's woke of me to say that it's a beneficial thing for people who have differing and intelligent perspectives to join in on discourse on this website about their experiences and opinions, then I don't know how you got here, but the exit's on your left. I can be enamored with a video by one of the most eloquent people on the platform, for Harriet, discussing the importance of valuing oneself one moment and be chortling at a Casey Ianzo video taking the piss out of something inconsequential the next. There are also a bunch of different mediums that commentary is now being expressed through. Some commentary videos are delivered while someone is delivering a look. Some commentary videos seem more like sit-down chats with a professor of some sorts. Of course, you still have the classic face cam and intricate editing, but it's so awesome seeing the way commentary is perceived stretching beyond my wildest dreams. I also quickly want to discuss one creator who made his rise during the late modern era, and that would be D'Angelo Wallace. If we are talking about the foundation of commentary, discussing prominent figures on YouTube, D'Angelo is the apex of doing so. His trilogy on the participants of Dramageddon 2.0 are the best pieces of commentary content that I have ever seen, with the takedowns being very methodical and poignant. He managed to merge the aesthetic of reaction commentary with the research and presentation of critical commentary. And if that doesn't scream talent, I don't know what will. He is the epitome of taking notes from all of the previous eras, taking all the best elements from each, and adding enough charisma and presence that makes for content so good that it's been considered video essays on media outlets. If you can make commentary content that is so professional that it's mistaken as a video essay, that's an incredible feat. Overall, there are so many amazing commentators out there in the modern landscape that are making amazing videos that cover almost every single corner of the internet and beyond. How could this not be the epitome of what commentary was always supposed to be? Well, we've officially come to the end of the history and evolution of commentary. It's been an amazing ride, but there's still something that I would like to discuss, and the only point that we can look towards now is the future. Although there's no parallels that I can draw in a time that doesn't exist yet, I can speak on my hopes for what I'd love to see happen with the future of commentary. As I said, I'm absolutely in love with where commentary stands at the current moment, and I wouldn't change anything about it. Well, except for maybe one thing. Considering that there are so many creators in so many different sectors of YouTube, I think that it would be awesome to start seeing some crossovers and see people making videos together that you wouldn't particularly expect. But once you think about it, it makes sense that they're put together. I want to see D'Angelo Wallace and Tro create a 2-hour-long analysis on a drama that has been lingering around the site for years. I want to see Tiffany Ferg and Casey Ayanzo take a more obscure topic and rip it to shreds through both analysis and big old goofs. I want to see Jarvis Johnson and Kunkin Dassner tackle something that's a pretty serious topic, but do so in a way that's digestible and enjoyable to their fan base. And I want to see Drew Gooden and Pyrocynical attempt to see who can have the driest humor for 3 straight hours. I could go on and on with examples for hours on end, but the point is that there are so many unexpected opportunities for amazing pairings within the community. Since it's exponentially grown over the past couple of years, you'd think that there would be more surprising and fresh pairings and collaborations, but that generally hasn't been the case. So going forward into 2022, as ridiculously corny as this may sound, I want to see the community start to come together from all corners and cross paths with one another. I know there could be some amazing content produced through doing so. Ultimately, the commentary genre is one of the most interesting spaces on the internet that I've ever seen develop. It went from being a cesspool of groupthink and conformity, even though it was a cesspool that I enjoyed, to a place that can't be boiled down to just one description. Commentary is everyone, everything, and everywhere. And as my final message, I want to say that if you, watching this video, have ever wanted to make commentary at all, make the jump and do it. You may not think that you have anything to say, but everyone has something that they are passionate about, and you have a platform at your disposal. Who knows? You might even end up being a part of the evolution of commentary. That was the worst outro sentence that's ever been uttered, but the sentiment is genuine. Go make something. You'll be happy that you did. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank my patrons, Weston Katecki and Carl McGee, and my producer, the BC. If you'd like to help support this channel and get some pretty nifty perks in exchange, my Patreon is in the description, as well as my Twitter so we can connect. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.